Forbes Books presents Leading What Matters Most, the podcast that helps you change behaviors, improve performance, and unlock the potential of your people. Here's Phil Geldart.
Frederik, hi, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you for having me, Phil.
It's great. Are you really in a geodesic dome there?
I am, absolutely, yes, in the Santa Cruz Mountains, in a little forest.
Wow. And did you build it yourself?
We actually did, yes. A couple of friends. We gathered 2019. I remember it was December 1st. It was pouring rain, quite cold at that time, but about 6 or 7 of my friends came over. We built a geodesic dome because we thought it's going to be a great guest house for people to stay over in the forest. But then 3 months later, the pandemic hits, March 16th, 2020.
Right.
And so no guests moved in, but it was a perfect setup to, work from the forest and have a little schoolhouse for my 3 kids as well. And people kept joking that, Frederik, you predicted the future because you knew that, we all had to move into like a different space. And I said, like, no one can predict the future, but you can create it yourself. So here you have it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I would certainly like to chat with you about that, but just to stick with the geodesic dome just for 1 minute, I remember studying, it was Buckminster Fuller who created it, wasn't it? It was such a fascinating concept. So did you get it pre-built or prefabbed, or how do you actually go from let's build one to having one?
Yes. So I was always fascinated, by architecture and how it influences our way of thinking and behaving as well. And, from building the Google garage or kind of like, working at Stanford in the design institute, I've always been exposed to interesting spaces, let's put it that way. And now we have actually 3 spaces in our backyard, in our forest, like 2 geodesic domes and an A-frame, and all serve a specific purpose. I actually have now a 4th one, which is an art studio. All serve specific purpose, right? To either grow your food or grow yourself, or offer education to others, or kind of like do artwork and so forth. And I feel like this is something everybody can control, to get into spaces that really inspire you and help you to think differently.
It's fantastic. It's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think it would be great, maybe just to give the listeners a sense of your background, which is fascinating. You've done an amazing number of things and seen a lot of the world, and how you came up with kind of the concept for the book. And then let's chat a little bit about, I'm really interested in talking about this sort of thinking about the future and some of the things that you have there. But just to give a framework for kind of the genesis of your thinking that will give us an ability to talk from that.
So I, wrote a book about your future, Phil, and how you can create a better one for yourself. And I'm really trying to address everyone in this world, helping them to move away from that question, what will the future bring, towards a better question, I feel, what future do I want to create? And the question is always, how can we do that? How can we create a better future for ourselves? I think that's on many people's minds nowadays. And hopefully will be, in the future as well. And I'll offer, some advice and some practices, but also stories that really help people to invent a better future for themselves. As I've learned that over my career and in my life as well, to really be in control of what happens next, and make choices that are influenced by optimism, by openness, by curiosity, a sense of experimentation and empathy as well. And that are the dimensions that I help people to apply to their lives to really help them to build a better future for themselves.
So when you talk about building a better future for yourself, I know you talk a lot about mindset in the book, and so on your sort of what next is now, which is a great title. I'd love to understand a little bit more about how you feel I can create a better future for myself. Now, I have some additional thoughts I'd like to talk about leadership, but let's talk about me first, and then we'll move towards the leadership side.
Yes, great question, Phil. And I might ask you that question, like, why do you like the title and what does it trigger for you?
Well, I think I've always felt that you have a choice in the present. I can do things which will change the present, which look in the short term like high value, but are actually low value. Or I
Mm.
can invest time in the present for something that will benefit me in the future. And the example I give is, you know, a student graduates and his parents say you should get a job and he goes works at McDonald's and gets a minimum wage, or he goes in his garage and he invents something and 3 months later he's got something he can take to market and sell for $1 million. So during that 3 month period, it looks like he's actually doing nothing and being indolent, but he's actually innovative and creative. But he's getting pressure from his parents, go get a job, go get a job. So this
Mhm.
idea of you control the future with what you do now is what I felt you captured in that title, that you have to think about the present as a vehicle to the future, not just a vehicle for living in the moment. That may not be kind of where you're thinking, but that was what that title captures for me, which is so powerful. How did I do?
I think I think you captured it perfectly, Phil. Absolutely. That's, the choices we can make and the choices really. So for me, the formula is pretty simple but powerful as you described. Like the choices you make right now equals your future, right? And so if we can make more intentional choices that are driven by curiosity and imagination and experimentation and so forth, as you described, going into a garage maybe, right? And trying to really follow your curiosity and try something out, right? That leads to more opportunities and more possibilities in your future. And so, I like to say that the future is something you must make for yourself. You actively shape your future through the choices that arise through your practice of creativity and imagination. And when you really can see all of the choices that are possible, you will realize how much power you have to influence your future. And I think that's something that applies to everyone in this world and can actually be used by everyone as well.
So one of the questions that I had uh, was, is this future that we can shape in the present by the choices we make, is there a window? In other words, over time, do I have more or less opportunity to influence the future? Because I would think I may be in circumstances that there's far less opportunity and other circumstances where there may be more. So it's not an absolute. That was a question I had as I thought through your points. To what degree do I have options in the present to influence the future?
Yes. So one way of looking at that is that your future isn't off in the distance, right? It's right here in front of you, right? How many times do we think like about the next 5 years or 10 years out, right? What I want to help people to do is bring the future close, right, to this moment, because it consists of the thousands of choices you make or don't make that determine where you go in your life and how you get there. So every choice you do make is part of the process of weaving and shaping your future. And the choices you don't make add up to a future decided by someone else. And I think, we really have to bring the future close, which means that it's not really helpful to follow predictions or kind of like, spend too much time thinking about the long-term future because that creates uncertainty. And our mind doesn't like to stay in the uncertainty, right? It likes to crave certainty. And when we bring the future close to this moment, I think we can also move away from having that anxiety and feeling overwhelmed about the future due to the rapid pace of change that we see happening. And so I really want to provide that roadmap to navigate these uncertainties and turning that anxiety into excitement about the future.
Elaborate a little bit more for me on the future is more immediate than out there.
Yes. So there's a fascinating study done at Stanford University called the Future Self Research Project. And what they've done is they asked 20-year-old students if they could imagine themselves 10 years in the future. And the students were like, yeah, I can totally see myself out there. I'll have more money, maybe, and a better car. And then they asked where the students, if they could see themselves 20 years in the future. And they said, definitely, I have maybe a family or a relationship and a good job and maybe also a house or a place to live. But when they were asked that they should envision themselves 30 or even 40 years out, the picture really got fuzzy. They couldn't describe anything about where they might be or what they might be doing. And they didn't have an image at all. So that happens to a lot of us, right? When we're trying to really even envision ourselves in a couple of years from now, right? We might not have a clear vision of, who we are and, what we're doing and who we're going to be surrounded by. So here comes the fascinating thing is that another of the project studies put the 20-year-olds students in virtual reality glasses. So they put on these headsets that showed them a much older version of themselves. And after several minutes taking in this image of their future self, the majority of the students said that they intended to pay more attention to their health and save more money for retirement, actually double the amount. So it turns out that the future has more meaning when it's right in front of us instead of being far off on the horizon. And we can practice that ourselves. We don't need actually virtual reality classes. If we are trying to really visualize ourselves and trying to do these exercises and practices, trying to create that image in our mind, where we're going to be and how we're going to work and how we're going to show up every day and who we're going to be surrounded by, and the image gets clearer, that changes our behavior in the present moment.
And how much of that would you say is mindset versus motivation?
Yes. So I have to say that I admire the work of Carol Dweck around mindset. I think it's such a powerful work that she put out into the world because now everybody talks about mindset, right? It's a concept and a framework that most people use. But I go, I think, beyond that in the book, where I try to move away from mindset as something that is, long-term. It's based on our belief system. It's a mental framework that is really ingrained in ourselves based on our past experience. I move beyond that and trying to use mind state as a construct to really look at it in a more dynamic and a short-term way, because mind state is something we can control immediately and we can shift and change depending on, the circumstances we find ourselves in. And I think that is, for me, a helpful construct for people to really look at their choices and how the mind state basically influences their choices in the moment as well.
What would you say, though, to people who feel like their choices are limited? I think in your mind, there are perhaps more choices available than there are in the average person. And certainly your life has demonstrated that you feel that way yourself. But how would you respond to someone who says, I don't feel I have much in the way of choices I can make?
Yes, it's a great question. And the future ready mindset really drives you to continuously learn, adapt, innovate, and connect with people and your environment in ways that really propel you forward to your future, to see more choices. And on this journey, it's not a question of what you want to do or who you want to be. It's a question of how you want to be in the future. So I would respond to that question when somebody tells me, I don't see many choices, right? I would ask them, like, how often do you show up optimistically? How do you show up more open to different opportunities? How do you show up with curiosity and asking questions? How do you show up and experiment with different options? And how do you show up with empathy relating to other people, but also empathy for yourself? And if you show up with these dimensions, what I call, right, again, there is a really big chance that more opportunities and more choices will actually emerge. And so it's not a matter of like looking for choices immediately, but showing up with optimism and openness and curiosity, experimentation and empathy, these 5 dimensions that really help you to see more choices and then also act on these choices moving forward. And so, hmm, if I'm totally honest with you, Phil, right? I really had enough people saying that the future is out of their control and that they are just waiting for what's happening to them, right? It's probably like that quote you just mentioned of people saying, I just don't see any choice and I don't feel like I can control my future. I want to really help people to move away from that narrative and really imagine a world where the future isn't something we are afraid of or try to avoid or feeling that it's just happening to us, but something we actively shape. So picture waking up each day with a sense of excitement and purpose and knowing that you have the tools and the mind state to create your future that you desire.
So it's less about the circumstances and more about the way in which I approach the circumstances I am in.
Absolutely. There's the Stoics and many philosophers in the past kind of like framed that concept of it's not a matter of what happens to you, but it's a matter of how you respond to what happens to you, right? And that is in your control because Phil and you and everybody else, including me, we are not in control what happens to us, right? I might go out here and there might be something happening to me, right? But I have control of how I respond to these things that are happening to me, right? That is totally in my control. And if I'm in an accident, or if someone is angry at me, or if someone uh, tries to hurt me, or if someone is kind to me, right, or someone offers help to me, right, I have in all of those situations a choice how I respond. And I think we should be really aware that these responses really help determine what's going to happen next for us.
It's interesting. Many years ago, I saw a video, and I can't remember who shot it. And it was a lady driving a car with her daughter, and somebody cut her off, and she got very angry at the person who cut her off. And her daughter turned to her and said, "Well, Mom, why are you angry?" And she said, "Because that person cut me off." And
Mm.
she said, "That's not why you're angry. You're angry because you chose to get angry." And I think that's an exact example, if I understand correctly, of what you're saying. We make that choice, how we respond to the situation, which then determines how we react in the future. Did I get that correct?
Absolutely. That's I would say a wise girl sitting there in the back of the car. I would love to have her as my advisor, right? Because in every situation, that's exactly the advice we need to hear, because our minds are working differently, right? Our minds are, in this short-term reaction mode where we really get, into like what we call, like, with our lizard brain, we get into protection mode, or we get into like a fear mode, or like a fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? And I think that's not helpful, right? Because we can overcome that. We can be smarter than that. We can think, maybe let's choose with empathy and trying to understand that person who cut us off, right? Maybe they were in an emergency situation, having like, someone in the car that needed to go to the hospital immediately, right? Maybe they were, running late for their job interview, right? That, is the once opportunity they had in the last couple of months to really get a new job. Maybe they were, late to pick up their, parents from the airport and trying to get to the airport as quickly as possible. So we're trying to empathize with that person, and then based on what we can find, respond in a smarter way and say like, okay, that person cut me off. That's fine. They might be in a hurry, right? I'll just give them the way. And, maybe I'll support them by actually, stopping and like make the way for them, right? And offer that kindness to allow them to go even faster to the airport. And in many situations, right, that is a choice we can make. And I love that example that you gave, Phil, to really help to illustrate that in every situation, either that happens to us or that we can choose, we, should respond with, openness, with curiosity, with empathy, um, because that gives you more choices and will lead to a better future, right? Because that person will go wherever they want to go, faster, and you are not in an accident, right? Because following that person and getting angry at that person is not a good choice, because that will limit your choices in the future as well.
Very neat. I Thinking about that example, one of the things that has often struck me is if I knew that the person in the car who had cut me off was actually my son, I
Mhm.
would be far more gracious in my response than if it's a stranger. So it's back to this whole idea of how I think about things rather than what reality actually is perceived to be. So that's neat.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we can influence that, right? We can literally imagine, as we have that superpower as human beings to imagine. We can imagine, hey, let's for a moment imagine that is somebody that we know, or
Yes,
it's a friend of ours, it's our son, whatever it is. And as soon as we're trying to imagine that, our reality changes, because then our choices are different. And why not imagine that, we can be friends with 8.5 billion people on this planet, right? And they can matter to us, because every human being should actually matter to you, right? In a way that you offer kindness, you offer empathy, you offer a sense of curiosity about them as well.
very neat. So, Frederick, let me shift gears for a little bit and talk about the corporate world and how leaders who understand the things which you're chatting about can encourage it in their staff and on their teams. Because one of the things, these five things: optimism, openness, curiosity, empathy, and experimentation. Experimentation would seem to me to be the obvious place where a leader can influence. But if I choose to come to work and my leader is not supportive of this kind of thinking, I may find myself limited. So, how do we help leaders encourage the kind of thinking that we're chatting about here? And particularly, how do they encourage experimentation? Because that would seem to me to be the one they have the greatest influence over.
Absolutely. Um, so this is really something where I feel you have to be a role model in as a leader in an organization, right? And I see that all the time, in the corporate world, where people ask me exactly that question, Phil. Like, how can I, enable these qualities in my team and in my people that I lead? And I say, mostly, if you're showing up with those qualities, with openness, curiosity, optimism, sense of experimentation, and so forth, share examples of your own life and really be that role model, people will follow you. And I know that for sure, because my kids, right, will actually do the same, right? If I show up with optimism and curiosity and so forth, they will do the same, right? I can't force it on people and say, like, you have to experiment more and make that mandatory. That's not how it works. But if I show up with a sense of, you know, um, not a sense of like, but with risk taking and trying to try new things and so forth, people will actually follow. And that creates something that is called psychological safety, right? An environment where people feel safe enough to take a risk, to try something new, and being able to experiment. And there's one more thing that we all have to realize, and that is that we all have that fear of failure, right? And that fear of failure is a natural instinct that has been passed down from our ancestors. They had to worry about things like being eaten by big predators, or eating poisonous plants and so forth. And today we still want to feel safe. But most of the things we do in our lives aren't that life threatening, right? Surprising news, right? It's not that, we have to try plants every day, right? And there's a, high chance that we're going to die. There's labels now on our food that makes it very safe for us to eat those things. And we don't have these big predators that are going to, uh, be dangerous to us. Sure, if you're climbing a mountain or jumping out of a plane or working with wild animals, you need to worry about safety, right? That's for sure. Because those activities can be dangerous without proper precautions. And, definitely wear a helmet if you're on a bike or a bicycle. But when it comes to everyday things like, and that's in organizations very true, starting, a new project or trying to create a big vision for your future, right? Or your team's future, or talking to a new client, or even applying for your dream job, the risks are much smaller. So you have to ask yourself, what's the worst that can happen? And most of the time, the worst thing that you'll be exactly where you are right now, right? So you make not any progress. And maybe you'll feel a little embarrassed if you fail, but you'll still be safe. So many people hold back because their brains trick them into thinking any failure is as dangerous as being bitten by that snake that I talked about. And they don't stop to ask, what's the worst that can happen? And again, most cases, the answer is pretty simple. You'll just be back at square one. And that is really a bad place to be, because then you're not making any progress.
So if I, as a leader, concentrate on being a role model and my team then sees that, how would you advise that I coach them when they come to me and say, okay, Frederik, I see you behaving this way. I see you having this mindset, this thinking, this way of approaching kind of the future. Help me be like that. What would you recommend? How could they coach them to be more able to embrace the kinds of behaviors that they're demonstrating?
Yes, that's a great question. So the first thing is, again, like being that role model, right? And, when it comes to curiosity, for example, leading with questions instead of answers is something that every leader can practice more, right? Instead of coming in to the meeting with, the one perfect solution that you think is going to solve the problem as a leader, come in with, 15 questions that you want to ask. That is like a small example, but how you can actually show up differently. And then you don't need to do any coaching, because the team members that you're leading will see that you're not coming in with a solution, and solutions are something that you have to build as a team afterwards, but you're coming in with questions that really unlock, possibilities, and unlock kind of like curiosity and so forth. And that is, I think, one of the ways you can really role model curiosity. And the other things you can role model too, like optimism, right? When you come into the meeting trying to find all the things that are not working about something, and putting the flashlight towards, all the negative and things that are, worst case scenarios and so forth, fine. You're trying to protect the team from, the dangers, but you're not kind of like optimistic that you're showing with your flashlight towards the things that are actually possible and looking at the opportunities. So these would be two examples of really showing up differently, um, and trying to be that role model that lives future ready and tries to really help to build a better future for yourself, and then for the team and the organization.
Okay, those are very practical and very helpful. And I think that's important, because if you see somebody behave this way, they make it look so easy. Like, oh, well, that's just the way you're wired, as opposed to, no, I've intentionally chosen to ask questions rather than give solutions. So it's those practical things that allow me as a leader to instill in others the same skills which I'm trying to master for myself.
Absolutely, yes.
Otherwise, it's just like, well, you just make it look like it's so simple.
And that's powerful, right? Like, Phil, how often do we, learn about a theory or framework or something that we, even in the beginning don't understand, right? It's so hard and so complicated that we just don't understand it, right? And that's not helpful, right? I think I'm coming with, you know, simple practices that everybody can try, but they're really hard to implement and to live by, right? But there is the power in, as soon as you show up again, like not with an answer to a question in a meeting, but with 15 questions, right? That is something super simple to understand. But how often do we see leaders actually do that? And so
No.
in my book, I really trying to give people simple enough practices that everybody can try out. But again, the power is really in living by these practices and showing up differently every day.
Intentionality.
Absolutely. Yes.
Intentionality.
Yes.
So, Frederick, let me shift to the company off the leader. How does a company build a culture where this kind of thinking is prevalent?
Again, like what I'm trying to do is start with the individual, because companies are run by individuals, right? They are, consisting of individuals who work there, who creating the vision for the company, who build prototypes and trying to experiment the way forward. So what I'm really trying to do is start with the individual. And for me, that is maybe a great way to help shift organizations too, is I've been able to work with, many different organizations, from startups to the United Nations, to the German Soccer Association, to, family businesses and so forth, even governments. I've always seen that people trying to blame the organization for being too slow or too bureaucratic or being too um, not innovative and so forth. And I've always found that it's not the organization that's the problem. It's the individual, right? That can actually trying to shift their thinking, shift their behaviors and so forth, so that the organization then as a general entity will actually change as well.
So, to what degree is the individual that you're chatting about here at the top of the house, at the executive level, versus all the way down through, if you're trying to create this kind of a culture?
So what I'm focusing on is really that notion of a mind state, right? And a mind state is something that every individual has. And a leader in an organization, the CEO, or, the intern that just joined, right? And I think if we are trying to not just focus on the CEO and the leaders in the organization, but literally on everyone, I think we have a powerful way to really shift the whole organization towards being future ready. Because um, the, embracing curiosity and fostering perpetual experimentation is how I describe it. And maintaining an optimistic outlook is about your mind state. And if we start with everyone in the company to really embrace those things, because the good news is that these are all human beings and they all have these qualities already in them. We just need to unlock them, trying to develop them, train them, and so forth. There's a greater chance that we can actually see the whole organization shift. So I know that's probably a little bit of an unsatisfying answer to say, like, let's start with the CEO or let's start with the interns. But I think we should start everywhere, because it's human beings that shape organizations. It's human beings that shape the future. And if we start with every individual to really trying to help them to build a future ready mind state and develop that, I think we see better organizations happening that also influence then how the future will actually unfold.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. But clearly, if the kind of a future ready mind state is modeled and encouraged by the CEO, to your point, it's then emulated all the way down. So presumably, if an organization wants a culture where everybody does this, it's a lot more effective if you see it happening from the top as well as at every level. Would that make
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes, totally agree. What I would like to shift towards is less like who should we start with, but how can we shift the organization? And that could be with that notion of rituals. I'm a big believer in rituals. For me, those rituals really help to activate values that you have in an organization. And how often do we look at organizations and see like they have, perfect values, like written on big posters on the walls, or like, on t-shirts, and like people walk around with those values and so forth. But how often again do we see that these values are not activated, right, in a way that they are lived by in the communication that goes out, or in the meetings they have, or in the one-on-ones, or in the all hands that the organization is conducting. So what I'm trying to do is really trying to help people and help organizations to develop rituals that really activate and bring those values to life. And when you can do that, there is a really great way to see that the organization moves towards experimentation with these rituals, right? Trying to see like what moves the needle towards a better culture. An example of a great ritual that, you know, I've seen, at Google over the 12 and a half years I've been part of the company, was TGIF, right? Think Google It's Friday. It's an all hands meeting where, when I was at the company, Larry and Sergey were present every week, and Eric Schmidt as the CEO. And every person was able in the company to ask a question to the founders, right? And to the CEO. And the microphone was actually handed to the interns first, or the people who started in the company that week. So the new employees. And that really brought that value of transparency and curiosity to life, right? On the first day when you started in that organization. And that's a powerful ritual that happened every week to really bring that value of transparency and curiosity to life. Another ritual that I found fascinating when we talk about like onboarding and how we welcome new employees is from Dropbox, right? What they do is they send out to new employees not just the contract, but also a recipe for cupcakes. And so they invite the new employees to show up to their first day in the office with cupcakes they bake themselves. Because one of the values in that company is delight the user, right? And if you want to delight the user, right, you can practice that by delighting your team and the people you're working with on your first day in the company. And so it's such an easy thing that we can experiment with and try out to really bring our values to life when we focus on rituals and how rituals can shape our culture too.
I was intrigued by your comment that these are not skills which take years to learn. They are within us. It's a matter of unlocking them. Hence your mind state
Mhm.
phraseology, that it's really about understanding and then using, rather than feeling deficient and I need to go study for 3 years before I can actually live this way, which is it's a big shift. This future ready doesn't mean I have to get ready, so to speak.
Exactly. Yes. It's something that is in yourself already. But what I found as well is that over time, you're using less and less of it, right? So we are born as, very curious individuals, right? We come to this world really asking a lot of questions and, using all our senses to explore the world and discover something new and learn pretty quickly about, everything around us. And we kind of put that curiosity to the back burner, right? When we grow up, specifically when we grow older, like we ask less and less questions. We are trying to use less our senses to really explore our environment all the time, right? How many times do we follow a sense or like a smell, a scent or a smell, to really trying to understand like what is that really smelling like, right? Or how often do we really follow a taste and close our eyes to really taste something new and trying to describe it and make sense of it?
Hmm.
Or how often do we, listen to something very deeply and trying to um, um, use our ears in a way that allows us to really trying to deeply understand what we are listening to, right? The noises and so forth. It's something that we don't use over time when we grow older. And I want to bring back that notion of we have everything we need to be future ready. It's just a matter of bringing back those qualities and really helping with those qualities make better decisions and choices.
And the benefit is huge because then you change your future, which is what it's all about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. For me, that's quite compelling. I don't know about you, Phil, but um, that might be, one of the most compelling things is that it really gives you more opportunities for your future, and who doesn't like to have that?
So, Frederik, chat with me a little bit about Dimension X. You talk about that. It's a fascinating concept. I'd love you to explain it and then elaborate a little bit on that, because that seems to me to be a sort of pivotal point in terms of the thinking that's required.
So again, like I start with those 5 dimensions that I feel like are necessary to live future ready and really shape the future that we want to see happen. What I also found working with, tens of thousands of Googlers, for example, or like, Stanford students and people from around the world is that there's always something very unique about every individual. And that's what I call Dimension X. And I want to help people to discover and harness their unique superpowers or strengths that really set them apart and allow them to make a significant impact. And so it's something that we all have in ourselves, our unique superpower. What's interesting is that some people are just not aware of it, right? Some people just not aware what their unique superpower is. So I help them to discover with like a life mapping exercise to really find your unique superpower, your Dimension X. And by finding it, you can actually make use of it because now you're aware of it and you can put it to work wherever a challenge is going to arise and trying to really benefit from it. So for me, my Dimension X, for example, is a bias towards action, right? That helped me always to make progress and move forward. I never was a person that, overthought kind of like a lot of things or like trying to really think about all the consequences that could happen or like the best and worst case scenarios that might emerge, when I go for something. I was the person, and I'm still am, that really had that bias towards action and just give it a try. And so that is really beneficial to me when I think about a choice I want to make. And so I really want to help people to discover their own unique superpower and put it to work because that allows them to set themselves apart and make a significant impact as well.
Very clear. Well, one of the things that is at the core of Eagle's Flight is this idea of harnessing the potential of each individual.
Mhm.
Our way of talking about you do have this Dimension X, you do have this potential, and it needs to be released, it needs to be accessed, it needs to be used because it is there, whether you're actually aware of it or not. So I understand that. And again, I would presume that if you're going to ask the leaders to help people realize that, it would begin with them modeling and then asking questions to begin to explore and expose it. Would that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. And Phil, I see you as a very, self-reflected person, and maybe you've done many, many of these exercises to really think about your Dimension X. So could you probably share like what your Dimension X could be and your unique superpower?
I would think it is probably the ability to win the hearts of others.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I think there are many different things that go into it, but that is probably the thing that I would identify. I'm not sure I ever articulated it before, but that would be it.
Thank you for articulating it. Yes.
Neat. Frederik, you have been a joy to chat with, and I appreciate the time that you've taken with me today. I hope the book is a huge success. Obviously, it's something anybody can pick up and read and benefit from. I love the idea that it's immediate and it's not something that I need to study for years, but you can take the years of experience you've got. What next is now is great. So thank you again for sharing your thoughts and being on the podcast. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me, Phil.
This has been Leading What Matters Most with Phil Geldart. If you want to create a culture that drives performance and develop leaders that inspire and motivate, go to philgeldart.com. Leading What Matters Most is a production of Forbes Books.